Hello! In this video, you're going to learn how to create a dynamic dialogue system in Unreal Engine. So I can go up to this NPC, when I press Z on my keyboard, it will interact with this NPC. His name is John, and he says, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. Then the dialogue will end. We'll also go over how to set up dialogue with options. So this is Sam. He's asking me, hey, how are you doing? I can respond, life has been great, or life has been horrible. And depending on my response, will depend on what he says. So he says, that's great to hear, because I said life is great. And we're going to set up our dialogue system in a flexible way. So I can select this cube, and I can just go add, and I'm just going to give it my dialogue component. And then for the cube, I just need to scroll down and make sure that it generates overlap events. That way my player character can overlap with it. I think the default mesh in Unreal Engine, you can't overlap with it unless you check this. And then in my dialogue component, I can basically decide what I want to call this actor. So I'm just going to call him Cube. I can basically decide what dialogue data table I want him to say. So I basically have a data table where we can decide all of the dialogue that we want an NPC to say. And we can also determine what row we want it to start at. So I can just play my game, and then I can go over to this cube. And when I press Z, I can speak with this cube, and he'll have the dialogue. So he says, hey, how are you doing? This time I'll say life has been horrible, then he'll say that sucks to hear. Hello! To get started, we first want to head over to our content folder, right click and create a new folder, and just call this dialogue. Then head inside here, and the first thing we're going to do is create a blueprint interface. This will make it so our player character can interact with other objects in our game. To create one, we can just right click and go over to blueprint, select a blueprint interface, and just call this the BP_interact. Then head inside here and go over to functions. We're going to add a new function and just call this interact. We'll call this whenever we want our player character to interact with something and start a dialogue. We then just want to go over to inputs and create a new input and just call this player reference. Then for the variable, just change this to be whatever your player character is. So I'm in the third person template, so the character that I play the game as is the third person character. So I'm just going to look for the third person character and just select object reference. If you're playing your game as a different character, you may need to change this according to what character you play the game as. We can then just compile and save this. The next thing we're going to do is right click and select a blueprint class and select an actor component and just call this the BP_dialogue component. We're going to give this component to anything that we want our player character to have a dialogue with. Open this up, and we just want to go over to class settings, go over to interfaces and go add, and look for the interact interface that we just made. And then just compile this and double click here. This will create it, and for now, just drag off here and look for print string. We're just going to add this to test that this is working. Compile this and save it. Then we just want to right click and create another blueprint class. This time select a character, and we can just call this our BP_NPC. Open them up, go over to mesh and just select the SK_Many, move them down, and then if we just go over here, select and rotate objects, and just rotate it so it's facing the arrow. I'm just going to make it so he has the AB_Many animation blueprint. Next, if I just go over to components and go add, I'm going to look for my dialogue component, and then we can just compile this. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to make it so if my player character goes up to this NPC and we press the E button, we will call the interact, and then if you remember in our dialogue component, whenever we interact with something, we make it print string, just so that we can test that this is working. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag in my NPC into my world, and then I'm just going to go to my third person character, over to the input folder, and over to the actions, and I'm going to create a new action for when I want my player character to be able to interact. So I'm just going to right click and go over to input, select input action, and I'll call this my input action_interact. Then if I just go to my IMC default, let's go to mappings and let's go add new action mapping, and then we just want to select the IA_interact. Expand here, and here we can basically assign what button we want our player to press on their keyboard in order to perform the interact action. So I'm just going to select here and make here Z. Whenever I press the Z button, I will call the interact. We can save this, close this, and then go over to our third person character, find some free space and just right click and look for the IA_interact. Okay. Next, if we just go over to our viewport, go over to components and go add and look for a sphere collision. Go over to the sphere radius and just increase it so it's like 150. And just so that we can see this, I'm going to go to my details and look for hidden. And I'm just going to uncheck hidden in the game just so that we can see this. At the end of this tutorial, I'll turn this off again. Next, let's just click this X button, scroll down, and go over to on component begin overlap, and select the sphere again, and go over to the on component end overlap. When our player character sphere overlaps another actor, we're going to check to see if it has the dialogue component. If it does, then we want to keep track of that actor. So we just drag off other actor and look for get component, scroll up, and we want this one, get components by interface, and we want to see if the actor that we overlapped has a component which has the BP interact interface. So we just want to expand here and look for BP interact. Then we just want to drag off here and look for get a copy. And then basically this is going to check all of the different components that our NPC has, and it's going to check to see if they have the interact interface. If that's the case, then we just want to right click on this and promote it to a variable and just call this dialogue actor. Connect from here into here. Then if say our player character ever leaves the dialogue actor, we are going to basically set it so this is nothing. So I'm just going to drag this in. I'm holding control. That will basically automatically get it. When our player character ends overlap with an actor, we want to see if the dialogue actor is valid. And if it is, then we're going to set it so the dialogue actor is nothing. So if you just hold Alt while you drag this in and just set it. So now when our player character basically overlaps an actor which has the dialogue component, we keep track of it. And when they leave it, we unkeep track of it. Next, if we go over to our interact, just expand it. And whenever our player character presses the start button, if we have a bad reference to our dialogue actor, then we're going to start a dialogue with it. So if we just drag in the dialogue actor, we want to see if it is valid. If that's the case, then we can just drag off here and call the interact message, connect from is valid into here, drag off player reference and look for self, and this should call the event interact inside of the dialogue component. So now if I just compile this, close this, and then let's play our game. If I go over here, when I press Z, it print strings hello. If say I leave it, when I press Z, the print string doesn't work because I'm out of the radius of the dialogue actor and it's no longer set. Next, let's make it so that we can go up to this NPC, interact with them, and have a dialogue with them. To get started, if we go back to our dialogue folder, and we just want to right click, go over to blueprint, and create a structure, and just call this the dialogue_structure. If you don't know what structure is, it can basically hold many different variables under one variable. We want to, for the first variable, we just want to call this dialogue. And this is going to be the specific dialogue that our NPC says. For the variable, just change this to be a text, then add another variable, and just call this row, and change this to be a name, and then add another variable, and just call this a data table. For the variable type, change this to be a data table. We're going to use a data table later on, so don't worry if you don't know what this is. Then create another variable, and just call this end dialogue, and make it a boolean. Then just save this, close it, right click, scroll down, and we want to find Miss Sanantius, select a data table, Then for our data table, it's going to ask us to pick a structure. Select the dialog structure and go OK. And just call this the dialog data table. Open this up. And we want to go to the data table here and add a new row. I'm just going to expand it. Double click on the row name and make this 1. Then go over to the dialog and write in some dialog you want your NPC to say. So I'm going to make it say, hey, today is awesome. For the row, depending on whether you want your NPC to move on to another line of dialogue, we can leave this blank or we can specify something. For now, I'm just going to type in 2. For the data table, just select this data table. And then for the end dialogue, if you want your NPC to end the dialogue here and not move on to another line, just make sure that this is checked. If you don't, you can leave this blank. So I'm just going to right click on this and go duplicate. Here under row name, I'm going to make this 2, and I'm going to make the dialog here something different. I'm going to make it say, I wish every day could be like this. Here for the row, I can just leave this at 2. And then for the data table, we want this to be dialog data table. And then here, I'm going to make it end the dialog. So after the NPC says this line, the dialog will end. And here I've made the row 2. So after my NPC says it's dialog, it's going to move on to this row. Next, let's just right click and go over to user interface, select a widget blueprint and select a user widget and call this the widget blueprint underscore dialog. Double click and open this up. Go over to the palette and look for a canvas panel and just drag this in. Then look for a horizontal box and just drag this into the canvas panel. Expand it like this. Anchor it to the bottom. Then look for some text. Drag it in. And just call this the speaker name. Make sure it is a variable. So this is going to be the name of the NPC which says the dialogue. Next, drag in some more text into the horizontal box. Select the first text, go over to padding and give this a padding of, let's say 10 in the right. That way there's a bit of a gap between the speaker's name and the text that they're going to say. We also want to make sure that this is a variable, so make sure it is a variable and just call this the dialogue text. Then just go over to the graph, go over to event construct. This will basically fire as soon as our widget is displayed on the screen. And what we want to do is first drag in the speaker name. So I'm holding control on my keyboard and I'm just going to drag this in. I'll drag off here and look for set text. And we want this one, set text text, connect from here into here. Then for the in text, right click on this and promote it to a variable. And we can just call this dialog user name. Make it instance editable and expose on spawn. Then drag in the dialog text, drag off here and look for set text. And we want this one, set text text, connect from here to here. Right click on this and promote it to a variable. And we can just call this the dialog text. And I'm just going to call the dialog text variable because I already have a variable called dialog text. I'll make this instance editable and expose on spawn. Let's compile this, then close it. Let's go over to our BP dialog component. We can delete this and create a new variable. And we can just call this name. This will be the name of the NPC which is using the dialog. Make this variable a name and make it instance editable and expose on spawn. Okay, so event interact, when we interact with this dialog component, what we want to do is just drag off here and look for get data table row. For the data table row, select the dialog data table. Right click on this and promote it to a variable, and we can just call this our data table. We want to do the same thing with the row name. So right click on this and promote it to a variable and just call it row name. Okay, then briefly, because Unreal Engine is a bit weird, just right click on this and break the link of this and select the dialog data table again. Drag off here and look for break dialog structure. then connect this into here. Before, if I just press Alt, then you can see I can't really drag off here and look for break. So we just need to select it and then drag this, otherwise Unreal Engine acts a bit weird. Okay, so when we interact with this NPC, we're going to get our data table, and then using that data table, we're going to make our dialog widget appear on the screen. So once the row has been found, we just want to drag up here and look for create widget. The widget we want to create is going to be the dialog widget. For the dialog username, we can drag in the name variable, connect this into here, and then for the dialog, the thing that our NPC is going to say, we can just drag in the dialog into here. Then we just want to hold Alt on your keyboard and drag in the row name and the data table, and also just create a new variable and just call it end dialog. Make this a boolean and then just drag this in. Then we want to connect from row into here, from data table into here, and then from end dialog into here. And then before we do all of this, we just want to right click on the widget blueprint dialog, promote this to a variable, and just call this the dialog widget. I'm going to select all of these nodes, move them forwards a bit, connect from here to here, then just drag off here and look for add to viewport, and then connect from here to here, and just compile everything. Select your data table and make sure it's the dialog data table. And let's just test that everything's working. So if we close this, then go play. When I go over to my NPC and I press Z, we can see it print strings, none, hey, today is awesome. So I just need to select this NPC, select their dialog component, and give them a name. So let's call him Sam. So if I go play, when I go over to him and I press the interact button, it says Sam, hey, today is awesome. Okay, next let's make it so he can say multiple different lines each time we interact with him. If we open up our dialog component, when we interact, we want to check to see if we should end the dialog. So if I look for a branch, and let's just drag in the end dialog and connect this into here, and from false into here. If you remember, whenever we say a dialog, we basically check to see whether we should end the dialog. If this is ever true, then we want to just drag in our dialog widget and look for remove from parent. This will remove the widget from the screen, and then we want to tell the game that the end dialog should be false. So if we just drag this in, and then we also want to tell the game that our dialog widget should be no longer valid. So if we just drag in the dialog widget and set it, if you just drag in a variable whilst holding Alt, it will automatically set it. And we just want to make sure that this is left blank. After we do this, we're going to check to see whether we should move our dialog onto the next line. So if we drag in the dialog widget, we want to see if it is valid. So I'll look for is valid. Connect from here into here. If it's not valid, then we'll get our data table, create a widget, make it valid, and do all of this. However, if it is valid, then we're going to move on to the next line of the dialog. So to do that, we can just copy this data table. I'm just going to select the dialog data table and then drag in my data table and also my row name. And I'm just going to drag off here and look for break. And then I'll connect this into here, and from is valid into here. So if this is valid, then we will do this. And then let's go back to our widget blueprint dialog. Right click and look for add custom event and just call this update dialog. When we call this, we are going to get our dialog text, copy it, paste it, connect from here to here, and from in text into here. Then compile this and go back to our dialog component. And we want to drag in our dialog widget, drag off here, and call the update dialog. Connect from row found into here, and from dialog into here. And then we want to basically set the row, data table, and end dialog. So just copy all of these and just paste them and connect from here to here, here to here, and from here into here. So now if I compile this and I save this, close this, and I go play, when I go up to him and I press Z, it says, hey, today is awesome. When I press Z again, it says, I wish every day could be like this. Then when I press Z again, the dialog disappears. And if I press Z again, it'll say, I wish every day could be like this, and he'll continue from where he left off. So nice. With that, we have set up the basic dialog. I hope you have a rough understanding of how this works. Because for the second dialog, I ended it on row 2. When in my dialog component, when I go to interact with the NPC again, because here we set it to row 2, I start from row 2 of the dialog. If I wanted it to start from the start again, I can make this row 1. Then if I play this again, when I interact, it'll say, hey, today's awesome. I wish every day could be like this. Then it'll end. Then when I interact with him again, it'll say, hey, today is awesome. And then it'll continue. So you can make it end where you want it to. Also, you'll notice I did set up a data table variable. So if you wanted to, you could create another data table. And then let's say I created another data table. I could select the row and then the data table. And then when I finish the first line of dialog, it'll switch me to the specific row and that data table. Although for now, just to keep things simple, we're just going to have one dialog data table. Although if you wanted to add more, that's how you'd kind of do it. So now we've set up a basic dialog system where the NPC will go through his different lines. The next thing I want to do is I want to make it so the player can select a bunch of different options. Maybe the NPC asks the player how they're doing, and the player can respond, I'm doing great, I'm doing bad, and so on. And depending on the response that the player gives will depend on the response that the AI will give. So let's go over how we're going to set that up. To do that, we need to create another structure. So if we just right click and go over to Blueprint, select a structure, and just call this the options dialog underscore structure. And we just want to open this up. For the first variable, call it option name. Make this a name, and I'm just going to say everything. Then I'm going to add a new variable and call this the row. Again, make this a name variable. Then add another variable and just call this the data table. And for this variable, make it a data table. And just like data table, object reference. Then save this, close this, then go back to our original dialog structure. And here we just need to create 2 new variables. For the first one, call it open-ended dialog, question mark, make this a boolean. Then for the second one, call this the dialog, actually call it the open-ended dialog options. And for the variable type, make this the open dialog structure. Sorry. And for the variable, make it the options dialog structure. Although this time, make it an array. So an array can hold multiple variables of the same type. Save this, close this, and then go back to our dialog data table. And let's just go, I'm just going to delete the second row. And instead of saying, hey, today is awesome, I'm going to make it say, hey, how are you doing? Question mark. Then I'm just going to add 2 options. For the first option, I'm going to make it say, I'm doing great. Then I'm going to go to my second one, and I'm going to make it say, I hate my life. Then I'm going to just add 2 new rows, and each row will basically respond to this question. So for this second one, I'm going to call it row 2. For the second one, for this third one, I'm going to call it row 3. And here, I'm going to make it say, that's great to hear. For the row, I'm going to make it 2. For the data table, I'm going to select my dialog data table, and here I'm going to end the dialog. For this third one, I'm going to make it say, I'm going to make the dialog say, that sucks to here. For the row, I'm just going to make it 3. And for the data table, I'm going to make it the dialog data table, and I'm also going to make this end the dialog. Now I'm just going to go back to my first row. And here for the row, I'm just going to make it 1. That way, if my player character tries to speak with the NPC again, after he says this line, this widget will disappear. Here, I'll make it, so I'll make it end the dialogue. Although I'm also going to make this open-ended. And here, if the player character responds with I'm doing great, I'm going to make it go to row 2. And I'm going to set the dialog data table. And here, if my player responds, oh, I thought I made this say I'm doing badly, but I did not. So here I'm going to make it say I'm doing badly. And if my player selects this option, I'm going to make the row go to row 3. And for the data table, let's set the dialog data table. I will save this. Then let's close this. And I'm just going to right click, and we're going to create the options that our player character can select as a widget. So if we go to user interface, select a widget blueprint, select a user widget, and I'll just call this the options, and I'll actually call it the widget blueprint underscore options. Let's open it up, go over to the palette and look for a button, drag this in, then look for some text, drag the text into the button, select the text, and we can just call this the option name, make it a variable, select the button, and make sure it's a variable. We can just call this the options button. Then go over to the graph, event construct, we will get the option name, drag off here, and look for set text, and I'll right click on this, create it to a variable, and I'll call it name, and I'll make it instance editable and expose it on Smart. And I'll also connect from here into here. Then I'll just compile this, save this, close this, and then let's go back to our BP dialog component. Just click here, and we want to see if the player was asked an open-ended dialog. So let's drag off here and have a branch, connect from here to here. If this was true, then we're going to get all of the open-ended dialog options, and for each loop we are going to create a widget. So if I drag off here and look for create widget, that widget will be the option, and for the option name we can just drag off here and look for break and connect the option name into here. And then where we're going to basically add this option, if we go back to our widget blueprint dialog, over to the designer, and go over to the palette and look for a scroll box, expand it, and just anchor it towards the middle, make it a variable, and we can call this the option scroll box, compile and save. Then go back to our dialog component, we want to drag in our dialog widget, and look for the option scroll box. So look for get option scroll box, and drag off here and look for add child, and connect this into here and this into here. And in some free space, I'm just going to right click and look for add custom event, and I'm going to call it option selected. And when I call this, I want to just copy this bit. So we'll get our dialog widget, and we're going to update the dialog, and then we just want to drag off here, get the data table row, connect from row name into here. For the data table, select the dialog data table, drag off here and look for break, and then just connect this into here. When we find the row, we'll connect from here to here and update the dialog with this. I'm just gonna expand this, and then we just want to set the row, and the end dialog. Select for row, and I also connect end dialog, and we also want to drag in the data table and connect from here to here and from here to here. Compile this, go back to our widget blueprint option, and we want to create a new variable and just call it the dialog component. For the variable, look for the BP underscore dialog component. Make it instance editable and expose on spawn. Drag it in and just call the option selected. Connect from here to here. Create a new variable, call this row name, and create a new variable. And we can just make it the data table. Make both of these instance editable and expose on spawn. Compile this, double click here to go back, and then we want to right click here and look for refresh nodes. Connect from row name into here, from data table into here, and from dialog component into here, and look for self. And this should all be working now. Let's test it out. If I compile this, go save, and I play my game. When I go up to him and I press Z, it says Sam, hey, how are you doing? Then I can say I'm doing great or I'm doing badly. Although I've realized I actually don't have a mouse, so I can't select. So let's add our mouse cursor whenever the player character is having some dialogue. So before I do all of this, I'm just going to right click and look for get player controller. I will drag off here and look for set input mode game and UI. Then I'm just going to drag off here and look for set show mouse cursor, and I'll connect this into here and this into here. And then for the set show mouse cursor, make sure it's checked and connect from here into here. And then when we are hiding our dialog widget, we want to do the opposite. So let's right click again and get the player controller. Drag off here and look for set show mouse cursor and make sure it's unchecked, and also drag off here and look for set input mode game only. Connect from here to here and from here to here. Then compile, save this, then go play. If I go over to my NPC, I have my mouse cursor. If I say I'm doing great, he'll say that great to hear. Sorry, so I think I spelled that incorrectly. It should be that's great to hear. I've also noticed my options are still there. So whenever I select an option, let's get our dialog widget and get the option scroll box, drag off here and look for clear children. Connect from row found into here and from here into here. Compile this and go save, then go play. If I go up to him and I press Z, if I select I'm doing great, that disappears. Then he says that's great to hear. If I press Z again, the dialog ends. And while I press Z again, he'll say that's great to hear. If say I were to play my game, then I press Z and I say I'm doing badly, he'll say that sucks to hear. Ends the dialog, and then if I speak with him again, he'll say that sucks to hear. Nice. So that's a dialog data table with an option. To kind of make things simple, I made it so it will switch the dialog data table each time. So that way, let's say I right click on this and I duplicate this and I create another dialog data table. I'll call this the dialog data table 2. Let me open this up, go to the data table. This time it's not going to have any options. It's going to be a more simple dialog. It'll just say, I am great at maths. I'll make this move on to row 2. For the dialog data table, we'll select dialog data table 2. This is not going to end the dialog, and this is not an open-end dialog, So I'm just going to delete this. Then I'm going to add a new row. This will be row 2. I'll make this say, did you know 1 plus 1 equals 2? For the row, I'll make this 2. So this is only going to have 2 rows. For the data table, we'll select dialog data table 2. And this will end the dialog. Let's save this and close this. If I press Alt with this NPC selected, that will duplicate them. And let me just select that dialog component. Oh, we should make it so we can customize the starting data table. So let's get back to our our dialog component. Select the data table and make it instance editable and expose on spawn. Compile this, close this, and let's make this guy have the dialog data table 2. And let's just move him here. Save everything, and if I go play, okay. I think I moved the mesh of the character. Whoops. So I want to select the character and move everything. Okay. So if I go play, let's go up to him. If I press Z, he says, I am great at maths. Did you know 1 plus 1 equals 2? If I go up to this guy, he has a different dialogue. Okay. Nice. There's another issue I want to fix. So let's say I speak with the NPC. If I walk away, the dialogue is still there. I don't want that. If I ever leave an NPC and I move far away enough, so let's say out of the radius, the dialogue widget should automatically disappear. So let's go over how to set that up. To do that, let's go back to our BP interact and add a new function and just call this leave dialogue. Save everything. Go back to our dialog component and look, right click and look for event, leave dialog. Okay, so I think I know why this isn't working. Just compile this, then we should see it here. Okay, double click on this, event leave dialog. We want to drag on our dialog widget and we want to see if it is valid. If it is, then I'm just gonna copy this node and then connect this into here. Compile this, close this, then go over to your third person character. And when we end overlap with something, we check to see if we have a valid reference to the actor. If we do, then we're just going to call the end dialogue. Or what did I call it? Oh, I called it leave dialogue. So look for leave dialogue. Connect is valid into here, and from here into here. I'll compile this, save this, and now if I play my game, let's say I go over to this NPC. If I press Z, he says, I'm great at maths. And then let's say I move away, the widget will disappear. Nice. The next thing I want to do is make it look a bit nicer because this looks quite disgusting. We could design better UI, but this is more of a tutorial so you know how to set up the functionality. Although I am going to go over how to make the UI a bit nicer because right now I think it's a bit too basic. Okay, so to do this, if we open up the widget blueprint dialog, go over to the palette and look for an overlay. An overlay basically allows us to put elements on top of one another. Drag this into the horizontal box and then drag the overlay so it's at the top. Then look for another horizontal box and drag this inside of the overlay. Select both of our texts and drag them inside of the horizontal box. Select this overlay and make sure it's set to fill so it fills out everything. Then look for a border. Drag this inside of the overlay and drag this on top of the horizontal box. Then look for an image and drag this inside of the border. And then for the border, select fill horizontally and fill vertically. Do the same with the image. Although for the image, we just want to go over to its padding and make it like 10. And then I'm just going to make the image color black. And then let's select our horizontal box and give this a padding of like 20, so it's neatly inside. Compile this, close this, and it'll also be nicer for the NPCs if when you select the dialogue component for their name, add a colon afterwards. That way it looks nicer. Then if I get play, if I go over here and I press Z, it'll say, Sam, I am great at maths, and I think this widget looks a bit nicer. Did you know 1 + 1 = 2? If I go over here, it looks nicer. Also, I forgot, let's just go back to our third person character. Select their sphere and go for details. Look for, I think it's hidden in game, and make sure it's true. Compile this, go play. That way, we don't see the sphere. Then there's one more thing I want to show you. If you just open up the BP dialog, you may want to make it so after the player has basically responded with an option, you may want to show the player character even more options. If you want to do that, very simple. We just need to copy all of the nodes here, where we basically give the player character some open-ended dialogue options. Copy and paste that, paste it, connect this into here. The condition of this is going to be, was the option an open-ended dialogue? And then for the array, connect this into here. And then you can create infinite open-ended dialogue. Also, I just came back to this project and I realized you may also just want to go back to your dialogue component and you just want to select the row name and make this instance editable and go expose and spawn and compile this, close this. That way when you select your character and you go over to the dialogue component, you can specify what row that you want it to start on. And then for the buttons, to make them look a bit nicer, if you just go over to a widget blueprint option, and then I think if we look for padding, just give this a padding of like 5. Select the button, and let's go over to appearance and over to tint, and let's make it black so that basically matches so black so it matches our text. And then I'm just going to go over to the width and make it like 3. Compile this, then if I go play, when I go up to this guy, the options look a bit nicer. So that's everything. If you want to continue Unreal Engine and continue developing your skills, make sure to check out my Unreal Engine Master Bundle. It'll teach you how to create a bunch of different games. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.